Under international law, every nation on earth has the right to choose and elect their own leader, and every population has the right to choose and elect their own leader, right? I think there is a consensus about that, unless, of course, you are from a country that the United States and its allies do not like. For example, Russia, for example, China, Syria, Iran, etc. So if you hold elections in these countries and the United States doesn't like the leader of this country or the outcome of the elections, then they will call it a sham election or fabricated, etc., etc. You know all the terms. Nowadays, if you go on X or any other social media platform and see the comments and the statements of Western leaders about the elections in Russia, you would think that they have authority over Russia itself. And I'm not here to defend the elections in Russia because I don't know the particulars or the electoral process in Russia itself. I knew and I learned from the media, just like you, that Putin won the elections with 88% of the voters, right? Now, is these elections legitimate or not? This is something for the Russians to decide. But for me, as a journalist, I would like to know if Putin is popular in his own country or not. So I tried to check in independent websites, for example, for pollings or statistics about the opinion of the Russian people about their leader and especially Putin. And I found, for example, in Statiska, which is Statiska, actually, which is a German polling center. And this article is published in March 14th, 2024. And the article says in February 2024, over 8 out of 10% of Russians approved of the activities of the Russian President Vladimir Putin. So 8 out of 10 Russians approve of the activities of the Russian President Vladimir Putin in February 2024. After Russia invaded Ukraine at the end of February 2022, the approving rate actually increased. Despite Western sanctions that were imposed on the country in response to the violation of territorial integrity of Ukraine, the approval rating remained high over the following years. So, the Russian president enjoys at least 80% of the 80% of his own people's approval rate, right? This is according to a German polling center. But if you ask these so-called experts and the talking heads on X or on mainstream media, they're all disapproving and saying that the elections are illegitimate in Russia. Now, what bothers me is that many of the Americans think that they have a moral high ground and they can preach and tell other countries if their elections are legitimate or not. I mean, the Americans can only stick to their own elections. They have no right whatsoever under any jurisdiction to meddle in the elections of other countries. Also, Zelensky, who came with a statement, video statement, criticizing the elections in Russia and calling it illegitimate, it reminded me also that Zelensky himself canceled elections in Ukraine, right? Because he said, we have war in the country and we cannot secure the electoral process in the country. I mean, Russia is also at war, but they hold elections, whether you agree with them or not. Secondly, if you go just a few months back, Zelensky was actually congratulating the leader of Azerbaijan, where elections aren't really democratic, right? And in Azerbaijan, the president is Aliyev. Before him, it was his father. And nowadays, Ilham Aliyev, he appointed his wife as the vice president of Azerbaijan. And nobody actually in the so-called collective West or in Ukraine have criticized the elections in Azerbaijan. On the contrary, they congratulated him because they need his gas after they boycotted, of course, the Russian gas. Now they're buying it. Some of these guys are buying from Azerbaijan, but it's their dictator, right? They like him. He's doing their bidding in the Caucasus. So it's fine for them to deal with Azerbaijan. What Western leaders have to understand is that there are some countries, for example, like Russia, like China, like Syria, like Iran, and the people in these countries are mostly patriotic, something that is missing in most of the Western countries, right? The term and the notion of patriotism doesn't really exist in these countries like it used to be previously. But in these countries, as much as Western leaders fight against the leaders of these countries, for example, in Russia, China, and Syria, and Iran, the people in these countries will be more in support of their own leaders, and they will gather around their own leader because they see an outside threat against their security and against their own domestic affairs. And today I was reading a good tweet by Maria Dubovikova, and she says, the greatest luck is that the West will never understand Russia and the Russians. The stronger the pressure, the stronger the concrete. And this is something correct in my opinion, because it also, similar situation exists in Syria. More pressure you put on the people by regime change war, covert operations, sanctions, etc., more the people will gather around their leader because they will see an existential threat coming from outside. So actually, what the Western leaders are doing, they're just increasing the popularity of leaders like Putin, Xi Jinping, President Assad, and the rest, you know them well. So I just wanted to make this video to explain my opinion about the elections in Russia. This is my opinion. What do you think about the elections in Russia? Are they sham? Are they fabricated? Were they orchestrated? Or do you believe that the elections were fair and democratic?